Sten, we're live.
Hey, thank you, Larry the Liberty Guy. And that was, of course, John Kiley, the famous organist at Fenway Park during my youthful years, many of our youthful years. I'm sure many of you remember John Kiley songs as he entertained us in between innings and before the game and as we left Fenway Park in those days. I don't know if I'll be going this year. I'm still boycotting my Major League Baseball. Sad. It hurts. That was my life for many decades, baseball. It's just amazing, the politicization of everything and the ignorance and naivety of so many senior level officials. And I mean, these are high profile, well paid CEOs. And they seem to have so little understanding of what's really going on in our country and in our politics. They really need consultants like us. They ought to hire the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity to do some consulting for them. All right, so welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Stenhouse. Today, I'm going to spend we'll start off talking about the census figures that came in. This is something I've been tracking and eager to see the results because either way, I mean, there's a bottom line story here that we'll talk about. So we're going to talk about the census and the untold truth about it, the truth of which cannot be spoken, but we will speak of it because that's what we do on this show. We talk about things that nobody else in the media will cover. In the middle of our show, we're going to have a special guest, Jessica De La Cruz, the two-term state senator from the Burrillville area, northern Rhode Island area, North Smithfield as well of Rhode Island. There were a number of bills heard in the Senate Judiciary hearing yesterday, of which he's a committee member, and of which pro-life activists are tracking. 3 of the bills they support, 1 they oppose, and so we'll have our interview with Senator De La Cruz to talk about the bills and some of the really, I don't know, shocking, nothing should shock you anymore, but they are shocking things that were said at the hearing. So stay tuned for that coming up soon. We actually have, I think, a little live footage of the testimony from Capitol TV. And then we'll conclude the show back with some more commentary from me on the INEPTOCRACY. That's a fun word that's been created probably by friends on the right, but the INEPTOCRACY. We'll define it for you, give you examples of it, including more from the Joe Biden and the liberal left land of make-believe. Whole bunch of examples to talk about. All right, so we're in the dugout. I'm going to go with the trusty Harvard cap today for no particular reason. Okay, first of all, in batting practice, some just one quick hitter before I get to the census. It's been a bad week, and I mean that with all seriousness for Rhode Island state senators. And we want to offer our condolences in at least 3 instances that I'm aware of. First, and most seriously, and very sadly, she's been on this show. Senator Elaine Morgan lost her husband unexpectedly last week. I believe services are today and tomorrow. It was a shock to her. It was a shock to her colleagues. And it was totally unexpected. You can just imagine the grief and the pain. So our condolences, Godspeed to Senator Elaine Morgan and her family. Also, Senator Jean Calkin, according to news reports today, had a leg amputated after a blood clot following an infection. Again, pretty suddenly, unexpectedly. So we wish Senator Calkin a speedy recovery. Apparently her spirit is good, and she says she's going to be back to work soon. So we wish her well, as we do Senator Morgan. And Senator Frank Lombardi from right here in Cranston, my hometown. You may have seen in the news his home. I don't know if it was primary home, but one of his homes, a major fire. So I don't know anything more than that. But again, Senator Morgan, Senator Culkin, Senator Lombardi, Godspeed to you, and hope you'll be back soon. Okay, the big news yesterday, and I'm sure it's being talked about in a lot of circles, is the Census Bureau figures, which happen every 10 years, as you know, and which determine not only how many, not only the population of each state, but it goes towards the allotment of the 535 House seats. Did you know that, civics? I mean, I wonder how many of your kids know that there are 535, 435, see it? Aha, 435 members in the House of Representatives, 535 if you count the 100 senators, or 2 per state. So, 435. So the distribution of those 435 House of Representatives reps are determined, and most people thought Rhode Island would lose a seat. We'll get to specifics in Rhode Island and some specific breakdowns, but the big takeaway, and don't forget, and with those House seats also comes electoral counts. So the electoral counts in states is now a little bit different. Some states have more electoral votes than they did, will have more electoral votes in the 2024 election than they did in the 2020 election, and some will have less. So we'll go through all that momentarily with you. But the big takeaway is that, at least from my point of view, is that blue states largely continue to hemorrhage people to red states. Blue states in the Midwest, in the Northeast, losing population to states out in the Mountain West and in the South. Is it weather? I don't think so. I think it's lower regulation, lower taxes, and just less government in your face. Probably less agenda-oriented public schools, and just you talk to so many people who travel, and I did. People are starting to travel again, and the comments I get about, oh, it was so nice to go to Florida or to Charleston, South Carolina. You can just feel the difference. People are living freer, happier lives. Not everybody's all pent up with, getting mad at the government about this, trying to clamp down on their lives or restrict their lives this way or that way. People say you can feel it in those other states. I don't know. I don't know that I would ever say I felt that, but people do, and that's why people are leaving, and that's why we have a problem in our state, which we'll talk about again shortly. In the 5 decades ago, the West and the South had a little under half of the U.S. population, and now it's 63%. All right, and most of the West and most of the South, not all, you got California out there and Oregon and Washington, but certainly in the South, far less taxes, far less regulation, a far freer environment, and people are going there. New York, I should say, is a case study. And again, this is the secret here. Despite an influx of foreign immigrants, where they're welcome with open arms, New York is going to lose a House member and lose electoral vote. They'll have only 26 House members, and this isn't the first year they've been losing seats. According to this article I'm reading, as recently as 1970, so again, 5 decades ago, New York had 41 House seats, 41 electoral votes. Well, no, then you add the 2 senators, 43 electoral votes. Now they're down to 26 House members, and they will have only 28 electoral votes. I don't know if we can call it the Big Apple anymore. It's the shrinking apple, and it continues to shrink. In fact, I think, was it 79, 89, by only 79 or 89 people did they lose out on their House seat this year. If they had if another 80 people had lived there, they wouldn't have lost the House seat, and somebody else would have. Okay, so here's the headline that. Well, you'll see surprises in the headline, and it did surprise me, and it did surprise many others. I was kind of ambiguous on how I felt about it. On the one hand, I think it's great for our state to keep both of our U.S. House seats. Although on the other hand, since they're both radical left Democrats, not good for the nation. Certainly would have been better for the country to have one less automatic Democrat member of the House. But I think overall it's good, but it doesn't solve the problem. Rhode Island does have a population problem. Now, in the last 10 years, ostensibly, our population grew by about 40,000 people, from about 1,050,000 to 1,090,000. About just over 4%. The national growth of population was just over 7%. So Rhode Island is still lagging the rest of the nation. But other states lagged more, and that's why they lost seats and will lose electoral clout. But here's the unspoken truth about why Rhode Island survived. I can't prove it. You can't get evidence. It's the most guarded secret in state government, at least in this state, just like it is nationally. But why do you think there was such an uproar when President Trump last year or 2 years ago tried to pass a rule which was not allowed not to count illegal immigrants in the census? It's a very interesting argument. Should the census only count Americans? Or should it count every warm body in the country, whether they're here legally or not? And the arguments cut both ways. Obviously, money and money sent to states from the federal government, representation in Congress of states, you could argue should be based only on American citizens. You can argue that. You could also argue it's humane to count everybody and to adjust those representations and allocations accordingly. So the arguments cut both ways. But the bottom line is illegal immigrants were counted, and in states like Rhode Island, which are essentially sanctuary states, at least under Gina Raimondo, and Providence is clearly a sanctuary city. Do you remember the commissions? There was in the news, you can Google it, or no, actually, DuckDuckGo, I think it's called. Google is sort of one of those big tech enemies. I guess DuckDuckGo is the new. I've read about it. I haven't tried it yet. If anyone's tried about it, put it in there. Let me know if you think it works good. But anyway,
I use this and it's amazing. Works just as good as Google. Great technology, maintains your privacy.
It was Larry the Liberty Guy. DuckDuckGo, and do your searches there and give it a try. I think we all shouldn't support the overt corporate fascists that are helping socialism grow in this country by canceling people and rigging communications. And I'm not saying they're rigging elections per se, but they're certainly rigging the distribution of fair information. Okay, but anyway, Gina Raimondo called together, I don't remember if they called it a commission or what they called it. Again, DuckDuckGo it. And how do we survive the census? How do we not lose a seat? And the answer was, we got to make sure we count every darn illegal immigrant in this state. And apparently they did. If you look at state to state migration trends, Rhode Island always, if you actually, and that's U.S. citizens, if you count the migration of tax-paying U.S. citizens, this is according to IRS data, and now that the census data is in, I'm going to do a little more. I started some work on this. I'm going to do a little more analysis, and I'll provide it to you in great detail. And we're even going to have on a national expert on this. But the state-to-state migration of American citizens, those who file tax returns with the IRS, shows that Rhode Island continually loses in that battle. Now, I'm going to put out a quiz to you right now, okay? And if you're watching live on YouTube, answer. There are three components, there are three elements that determine a state's population change. We just mentioned one of them, state-to-state migration of American citizens. Do you know what the other two factors are? Okay, so we'll give it a minute. I know there's a little delay here from when I talk to when you type, so I'll only be able to reward you after the fact. But I'll tell you the answer right now. So the second, and usually, and maybe equal, well, they're all, any one of them could be equally influential, is births and deaths. How many people die? How many people are born in the state, right? So the delta between those two adds or subtracts from a population. So you got the delta of people moving in or moving out of our state. You get the delta of the number of residents dying or being born in our state. And then you have international migration. Now, that can be legal or illegal, documented or undocumented migration from other states. It is my theory that Rhode Island grew its population from 1,050,000-something to 1,090,000 something, not because of primarily of deaths or births over deaths or positive state-to-state migration of U.S. citizens, but largely because of illegal immigrants in this state. The state, I don't know if the state knows, but if they know, they absolutely do not want us to know how many people in the state. I've talked to doctors. It's a big industry that God, I wish there was some investigative journalist that could look at this. There is a massive industry of undocumented immigrants in our schools, consuming medical services. One doctor I know often gets calls from the state saying, I've got some undocumented people who aren't on Medicaid or aren't on Medicare or whatever, and they need help, and they got no money, and so we need you and your good graces to treat them, and this doctor does on a pro bono basis. I just thought because doctors are pledged to help people. So how much of that goes on? How many doctors like that are performing services like that? You know, how much of our welfare money goes to undocumented? You know, and here's my conclusion on that. I think the people of Rhode Island are generous enough. I might not vote for it, but I think the people that if we knew how many and what the cost was, that in some large measure we would approve funding to be humane. I mean, we are a wealthy society. Rhode Island among the least wealthy of all the states comparatively, as far as prosperity goes. But we are a generous and healthy people, and let's not forget that. And if it was public, and it was either done through legislation or through ballot initiatives, I think the people of Rhode Island, or at least the majority of the people in Rhode Island, would be okay with allocating funds to take care of undocumented immigrants. But obviously there's got to be a cap to it. There's got to be, you know, you got to be reasonable about it. And we don't have any idea if our government officials are secretly being reasonable about this or not. We have no idea how big, I don't know if I want to call it a problem, but how big the issue is. But believe you me, the undocumented immigrants in this state are what saved our state from losing a congressional seat in one of our four electoral votes. All right, that's the unspoken truth. You won't hear it from anywhere else, but that's the truth. You remember Governor Mendo putting that commission together, and that they said it was to make sure everybody completed the census, but you know who that was targeted at. And I'm sure they got a hell of a team together to make sure that every undocumented immigrant was accounted for in that census. And that's why you had such a national uproar when President Trump tried to block the count of illegals. He tried it a few different ways, but we won't get into that now. So anyway, that's the unspoken truth. All right. So here are the changes in seats. And you know, most of the news reports are saying that it was largely going to benefit Republicans for two reasons. That between the, you know, you've got two new seats in Texas, one in Florida, one in North Carolina. You could probably, and one in Montana. You could probably say that the odds are that all, if not most of those 5 seats are likely to be Republican because they're pretty red states. Colorado is, depending on where how the gerrymandering works out, that could go either way. The 1 seat in Oregon is likely to go blue. Although, again, depending on how the gerrymandering goes, we know that even in Oregon, we know that outside of the city of Portland, most of the rest of the state geographically is kind of red. But anyway, but let's just say, all right, so of those 6, you know, 1 is kind of maybe neutral, maybe a little bit leaning blue in Colorado, maybe a strong blue in Oregon, but the other 5 are going to be strong red. Now, and then on the seats that are lost, losing a seat in California, very likely to be a Democrat seat that lost. Losing a seat in Illinois, very likely to be a Democrat seat that's lost. Losing a seat in New York State, very likely to be a Democrat seat that's lost. Pennsylvania, while losing a seat in West Virginia, very likely to be a Republican loss. Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, kind of all neutral in the Rust Belt there. Don't know how it depends on the gerrymandering. But either way, you still see that the losses favor Republicans and the gains favor Republicans. And the same thing applies electorally. You know, by some people's count, they expect just from the census redistribution, the Republicans will have a net gain of 3 seats. Now, think about this. Right now, when all the seats are filled, there's still some empty seats. There's people who've died in special elections. There's still a handful or 2 or 3 empty seats in the U.S. House. But right now, I think when all the seats are filled, it's 218 Democrats and 212. You make this shift to 3, that makes it 215, 215. So we will be essentially tied going into the 2022 U.S. House elections. Wow. Wow. And the same thing electorally is that a lot of people say that the distribution of electoral votes will end up being a net 3 to red states, which should help Republican candidates somewhat. Not that it's normally that close. So anyway, very interesting what's going on there with the census. But again, the unspoken truth. All right, one more item before we get to our guest, Jessica De La Cruz. And here's something you may have seen a peek at. I inadvertently showed you ahead of time. But, you know, we talked last week about the Derek Chauvin verdict in Minneapolis and how we questioned whether or not justice was really served. And one of the jurors, now apparently this juror you're seeing here, apparently she was an alternate, but it was her very strong feeling that the fear of a not guilty verdict and the fear of the riots and disruption that would cause was enough to take what might have been a questionable verdict and make it clearly the guilty verdicts we saw. We know the mobs are out there. We know that deplorable Rep. Maxine Waters was out there. Even Joe Biden made some comments. The media was pressuring. I mean, they were not sequestered, the jurors. They were subject to all this political pressure, all this physical terror. You know, one of the witnesses, and it was done for a reason, one of the witnesses before the verdict was handed down, one of the witnesses, it ended up not as being his old house, but had a severed pig's head thrown against his door as a sign. So these jurors said, boy, because don't forget, their profiles were put out there by I think the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Without putting their names out there, they put out basically all the information they had about all the jurors so that anybody could figure it out. And of course, their names would probably get leaked in the future too. That an innocent verdict might mean that they would be under attack from the mobs. They really shouldn't have held that trial in Minneapolis, and they really should have sequestered the jury to keep them. So I don't know that justice was served. All right, let's switch over and go to our guest. Not 4 bills having to do with sort of abortion or abortion services or even abortion insurance were discussed in the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday. One of the state's most avid pro-life senators is Jessica De La Cruz, as we mentioned, from the Burrillville, North Smithfield area. Not sure if she's got another township that she touches upon. But anyway, we had a chance to speak with her a little bit earlier today about her views on those bills and what happened in the hearings. So here's our discussion just a short time ago with Senator Jessica De La Cruz.
Okay, joining us now on the show is Senator Jessica De La Cruz. Senator, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now I know you're in an office environment today, so we probably can't, but we have to ask, because we ask everybody, do you have a cap for us today?
I did not bring one.
All right. We are a forgiving bunch over here on In the Dugout, so just to let you know. All right, Senator, it's not your first time, and just being on the show, and just to remind our viewers, you were chosen, and it was quite an honor to give the rebuttal to Governor Raimondo's State of the State address earlier this year. So your profile has increased. Let me just ask you before we get into the specifics, have you noticed any more attention to you, your office, your candidacy, your legislation since your profile was raised that evening?
I think there was a natural curiosity. People had asked if I had done that because I was running for governor, which I'm not. As I said, I'm running for—
Not going to make any news here today, huh?
No news. I'm so lucky to represent really the best towns in the state, and I'm going to run for re-election. But I think that the Senate caucus, the Republican caucus, has been making some waves. We've been very vocal on some issues, and we're trying to bring awareness to what's happening at the State House to our constituents. And I definitely see a lot more engagement, at least in my Senate page, and I just want people to know what's happening at the State House, because they do feel like, hey, where did this come from? You know?
Yeah. All right. In that regard, there are a number of pieces of legislation that pro-life activists are tracking. Right now, we're going to talk about 3 pieces of legislation that are favored and one that is not. Then we'll talk about a 5th piece after that. But just to set the record straight so everybody knows, you were in the Senate 2 years ago when that horrible abortion bill passed, correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And you tell our viewers how you voted on that bill.
Oh, I voted against the bill. Okay. There was no question. Yeah.
All right, this year I'm gonna share our screen here, and I'm gonna show our viewers, and this is what we'll talk about for the next few minutes. So this is a little graphic that was created to talk about 4 bills that were heard yesterday in one Senate committee hearing, and that committee was, Jessica?
Senate Judiciary.
Senate Judiciary chaired by?
Senator Coyne of Barrington.
Let's start at the bottom of this chart with the one bill pro-lifers are against, Senate 267. what the graphic says, it repeals the abortion coverage exclusion for state employee insurance plans. So what does that bill mean?
So it means like people such as myself that have coverage, health coverage through the state would be allowed to have an abortion on taxpayer dollars. So proponents of this bill had said that if we don't vote for this, it's because we're racist and, you know, it's all about equality.
Wait a minute. So repealing this exclusion, which is generally applies to every person covered by an insurance policy, is somehow racist to one special group of people? How did they explain that?
If we don't repeal it, then we are engaging in racism. That was one of the arguments. So as I've learned in the Senate, everything is racist nowadays. So if you don't agree with me, then it's probably because you're racist.
It's done so much to advance the, I mean, when you talk about the little boy who cried wolf, you know, crying racist all the time.
Well, it really
diminishes the true, and there's a true case of it out there.
Right, right.
They cry it every time. All right, so this is a bill that had, that proponents are abortion proponents are trying to push through, and pro-life activists are trying to defeat. What was the overall attitude, other than those who oppose it being called racist? What was the overall attitude of the committee on that bill?
You know, I don't know overall if anyone was swayed differently. As when they came in, they already had an opinion.
Are they ever?
Exactly. So the thing that I would say is we had this session on Monday. Usually, obviously, the judiciary hears bills on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but because of the pandemic, we've been hearing them on Mondays. But when individuals have to sign up over the weekend and it's nice weather and maybe they're not checking their email or their Facebook, they don't know that they can sign up to testify against these bills. So I feel like the timing was really, it could have been done better.
Yeah, well, they do play those tricks. All right, let's go to the next one on the lower right, S669, Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Our viewers can read it, describe why you favor that bill.
Well, this one is actually one that I submitted, and the reason for that is the science is clear. Babies in utero can feel pain, and scientists question whether or not they can even feel pain more intensely because they have a thinner layer of skin than those of either adults or babies outside of utero. And so it's inhumane to have a child meet its demise and they can feel that pain and they're either being chemically induced into abortion or they're having their limbs ripped from them, from their torso. We've got to do better than that. You know,
and
we
what
are
stage
a
of pregnancy do babies generally feel pain?
Well, the consensus right now is 20 weeks.
20, approximately 5 months, yeah. So
it could possibly be even sooner, but right now, 20 weeks seems to be the consensus.
Now, is there a reason? Is there a reason? Again, I'm going to be a little devil's advocate here. Do we know when a child can feel pain, or should the standard just be 5 months?
Well, the baby can't speak, and so we have to look at other factors: increased heart rate, recoiling from instruments.
So you can't test to see if there's pain.
You can't test, but you can make observable observations, right, such as.
Yep. Okay. All right. And I assume that.
And I testified in committee, quoting physicians. So it's not just what Jessica De La Cruz is saying, gotcha, it's what these professionals are saying.
All right. So there were doctors, I assume, on both sides of this issue, but some doctors you're saying did say that we can probe and we can do things and observe whether or not it looks like a baby is feeling pain or not.
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, let's go to upper left, S645, yearly inspection of healthcare facilities. What's that all about?
So this one is my bill as well. And in 2019, as you mentioned, there was the abortion debate, and it was a contentious fight. And during my investigations into the legislation and what would happen, I just wanted to see how many times Planned Parenthood or any abortion facilities were inspected. And I was trying to find information. I could find nothing online. And so I thought this has to be a mistake. So I'm going to call the Department of Health. And spoke to a woman on the phone, and I said, I can't find any inspections of abortion facilities to ensure that they're safe for women. And the woman on the other line kind of just said, well, that's easy. There are none. And I was like, so there are no inspections?
There are 0 inspection requirements for abortion providing facilities.
Well, I keep being told that there are requirements, but there haven't been any reported. But I will say there was one time when the facility was open that they went to inspect it, which is very different than yearly checkups where you come in unannounced. Because if the Department of Health is coming, you know you're going to make sure everything's nice.
You know your act a little bit.
Exactly. And so what I said in committee is fast food restaurants shouldn't be held to a higher standard than clinics that are servicing our young women. And a lot of the individuals that called in to testify against this legislation kept saying that we were holding Planned Parenthood to a higher standard, when clearly the legislation said
a higher standard?
Yes, and I shot that down every single time. It said the same standard as similar healthcare facilities. This isn't to put a special kind of requirement on abortion facilities. This is holding them to the same standard as similar facilities.
What other senators on the committee joined you in shooting down, you know, some of the false claims that were made that would be on the pro-life side?
Well, I would say I had Senator Rogers chime in and help out. Yeah, and
right, Foster.
Yeah, that's it.
Are there any Democrat pro-life on that committee?
There are. Senator Lombardi, unfortunately, he had a family emergency. He wasn't able to stay, but he's definitely a pro-life advocate.
Okay. All right, and then I assume the one that got the most attention was the last one here in the upper right, that's Senate 664, the Infant Born Alive Act, which basically says if a baby is born alive for any reason, it should get life-saving care from the medical facility and doctor, right?
Right. Regardless of the circumstance of his or her birth, regardless if they were intended or they were going to be aborted, we want to make sure that once they're born, these children are afforded the same rights and privileges as any other American citizen, any other Rhode Islander. And you would think that this is common sense, right? Like that we would just do these things, that we would provide care to an infant. However, there was one doctor closer to the end of the evening, Dr. Smith, where he went on.
Which hospital? Excuse me.
He's retired now.
Okay.
And he said that he gets to choose because he said, I don't want a legislator telling me when a child is born, whether or not, you know, the child should survive, because
he wants doctors to play God.
He advocated that the doctor knows better than the legislator. And I said, doctor, you know, you've been, I realize you have many years of education, and that's wonderful. However, when a child is born, we should provide it medical care. And don't you take an oath, a Hippocratic oath to do no harm? And certainly it's not up to the physician to decide. And he said, well, you don't know the circumstance of their birth. They could have a severe defect, something they can probably, maybe possibly not live outside the womb for very long. So there's no sense to provide medical care. Honestly, I find that horrific.
Did he claim he knows better than God?
Well, not.
Was that the attitude though?
Well, honestly, I would wonder. I mean, who would think that they could make that decision? That's honestly, I'm flabbergasted and at a loss for.
Other than doctors playing God, what were some of the other arguments you heard in testimony about why certain infants should either be allowed? Well, let me go back. When he says he made this, Dr. Smith says he makes the decision.
Right.
Is it just let the baby die and do nothing, or is there something more proactive to ending the life? Did the testimony get into that level of detail?
No, that's a really great question. And perhaps in the future we'll have to ask that. But after a certain amount of back and forth, the chair and the rest of the committee moves forward. So
they just don't want to hear it, right?
So I would say that the two
what are the other arguments against this bill that you heard?
So the other argument was that it prohibits abortion. So that's why I would say, please explain to me how this piece of legislation prohibits abortion, because nowhere in the legislation does it say that. And so that's why I would press on each individual that called in that made that assertion, because obviously it's false, and I had to correct that.
So despite shocking testimony of a doctor playing God, and despite falsehoods, do you expect any of the pro-life positions on either of these bills to prevail within your committee, or do you even expect any of these bills to be brought to a committee vote? I know you don't know for sure, but...
Well, I would say the pro-life bills, I can say with almost absolute certainty. Yeah, but I could probably say with almost absolute certainty that those pro-life bills will not make it to the floor. Although they should. Senator Rogers brought up a really great
point. Which means they won't make it to a committee, right?
Right, exactly.
Or will they
Senator
bring
Rogers
it to a
had
committee
said,
vote and let it get shot down? Which way will they do it?
No. It won't come to a committee for a vote, and it won't come to the floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the expanded...
I have a bad connection.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. It's a little bit of a bad connection. Sorry about that.
All right. One more related bill, a bill that you're just a co-sponsor of, and I know you're not you didn't write the legislation or anything, but there's also a bill that would allow Rhode Islanders to select or purchase a Choose Life license plate template. You're a co-sponsor of that. Dozens of other states have such a law. What else can you tell us? That bill is being heard tomorrow on Wednesday, apparently, April 28th. Mm-hmm. You know, Senator Paolino is the main sponsor of that bill, Tom Paolino. Anything else you'd like to add about that?
Well, let the people decide. The license plate won't be automatically printed. You have to have a certain amount of individuals to, I guess, purchase the plate before they can go into production. So if that's something that Rhode Islanders are interested in, why not let them decide for themselves? I know that there are individuals that would like that. We see that for other causes. So let the people decide. Right.
A lot of other special interests get license plates, and I don't know if it could be so controversial as a Choose Life. You know, I mean, it doesn't say anything specifically about abortion. And our viewers should know that the General Assembly passed a Choose Life license plate bill in 2013, but that was then vetoed by then Governor Chafee. So, but there are, let's see, according to my notes here, 32 states plus Washington, D.C. do offer such or similar plates. So again, we're not talking about anything controversial here. You know, the reason I bring it up, and we looked at those other bills, Senator, is, and it's sad they won't even come to a vote, because when the left hears something that doesn't fit its narrative, they just pretend it doesn't exist. Bringing it to a vote and putting lawmakers on record would be the democratic way to handle something like this. Don't you agree?
I do, yeah.
All right. My final issue for you, on a different bill that you're a sponsor of, you may have seen or at least heard last week, we had National Review Stanley Kurtz, a nationally known journalist. We had Brian Newberry on, who co-sponsored a bill identical to the one you co-sponsored in the Senate. And Stanley Kurtz claims that good conservatives like you and Brian Newberry were being fed unknowingly, unwittingly language from the left that's going to help promote a radical civics agenda that might allow, you know, stuff like critical race theory and the 1619 Project into our schools. Are you aware of the debate, and did you happen to catch any of the segments?
I did not catch your segment, but I did read the piece on National Review, and I would say it would have been great if a journalist would have called and asked myself or even Rep. Newberry and said, hey, this is what I'm doing, a piece on this, can I have some comment? So I feel like, you know, journalism is, if it's not dead, it's almost, it's on death's door. So I have to take issue with that first. Secondly, anyone who knows me knows that I do not subscribe to those ideologies of critical race theory, and I have 3 children in school, and I would be just beside myself if someone was trying to indoctrinate my children that way. So I would never put forth a piece of legislation thinking that this would be the end result. I understand that the individual from, what's his name, from National Review, his name? Stanley Kurtz. He sees that there may be a possibility, maybe an open door almost to allow for that to maybe possibly happen in the future. And as I told other individuals, I'm happy to talk to anyone if they have a concern about a piece of legislation, or if they feel like maybe there was a blind spot or whatever it is. I've never not accepted a phone call. So I've heard the concerns. I've talked to several trusted colleagues who also feel like that was a bit of a reach. But I also say this, there was a Republican legislator, I will not name, that was very much against this piece of legislation, but later on, not only seconded it on the floor in the House, but voted for it. So their perception of the bill was changed as well.
All right, so last question on that. Will you consider and review suggested changes to the bill, perhaps in a sub-A, since you're the bill sponsor, you have some control over that, that would remove at least the questionable part. You can argue either way, whether it opens a door or it doesn't, but it certainly opens a lot of questions. And the two questionable parts are the civics project and for the students, and the fund that could be funded by private political concerns. And so all we'll ask you here is, would you consider a sub-A that might remove those objectionable pieces?
Yeah, I would definitely consider. I'll have to look at the language and really comb through it. But like I said, Rep. Newberry has been there much longer than I have. And he has been not only a champion for conservative values, but he has also rejected critical race theory. But yes, absolutely be open to it.
And we both recognize you as good, strong, solid conservatives. So let that be on the record, even though there might be some language in the bill that might have been slipped in. But anyway, Senator Jessica De La Cruz, thank you again for being an upstanding public official, joining us, talking through issues publicly. This is the kind of transparency we need in government. Thank you. Good luck with your pro-life bills, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the show again soon.
Thank you.
So great point she made there about, her being not ever wittingly allowing something like critical race theory to slip in. But if the bill unwittingly allows that, then I think the bill has to be considered for some kind of editing. So we'll see about that. What we want to do next is play for you a video clip, very short. I think it's just over a minute, of a little back and forth from the hearing with this Dr. Smith that the senator mentioned, who says that doctors should be able to play God to determine if born alive babies should be allowed to live or not. Think about that. This guy is claiming, you'll only hear a piece of it, but this guy is claiming it's not legislators shouldn't decide whether babies should live or die, but doctors should decide whether born alive babies should live or die. Let's listen.
If this extremely rare event were to occur, the patient and her gynecologist should be on the same page when discussing what will happen during and after the procedure.
All right, hold up, Larry.
Legislators.
Hold up, Larry. Yep. The procedure ends when the baby is delivered. All right, the abortion is over. Any rights to a woman's body are done. You're now separate from a woman's body, a baby. Since when in our society does a doctor in consultation with the mother have the right to choose whether or not to kill that baby? Let's keep on.
decision should not be involved. And
Stop.
I ask you,
Said the legislature should not be involved. I would claim a doctor should not be involved in that decision either. Go on.
Leaders to stay out of the operating room. Please let the medical professionals do their jobs. The doctor has spent 4 years.
Doctor, hold on 1 second. We have a question from Senator Dela Cruz. Senator Dela Cruz, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, you stated that it is extremely rare, but extremely rare does not mean that it never happens. So there are instances in which it does happen by your own admission. I sat through 13 hours of testimony my first term as a senator, and I heard that abortion is not used as birth control and it's extremely rare, and we're only expanding it to make certain that women have access to abortions. So let's use that same logic and bring it over to this bill, where, although extremely rare, we should still provide protections for infants that are born alive, because they deserve the same kind of care anybody else would in their state of despair.
Thank you. Jessica De La Cruz is a pro-life warrior. If you watch much of that hearing, she did not let one statement from witnesses, bogus statement, go unchallenged. If you're pro-life, support Jessica De La Cruz, support these bills, and we'll have her back on to see what happens. So we want to thank her again for appearing on our show. But again, I want you to just imagine, see, this is how the elites on the left think. This is the doctor who thinks because he has medical training, who thinks that because he has years of experience working, who thinks that because certain cases are rare or not rare, that he has the right to play God. And whether it's over the life of a born child, born alive child, whether it's COVID restrictions on our lives, taxes on our businesses and on our families, regulations and mandates we must abide to. These elites, whether they're doctors, whether they're politicians, whether they're radical environmentalists, just believe they know better. Just believe they can play God. They can control our lives because they know better. This is the problem we have, especially in this state and increasingly in our country. You all know it. You wouldn't be watching this show if you didn't know it. Now, there's a term that I've seen before. We might have even mentioned it on this show once or twice, but and you know what? You know, these elites we just talked about, in almost every case, they're wrong and provably wrong. But the media won't tell you they're wrong, and the media will shoot down any of us who try to refute what they say. You have inept people, agenda-driven people, ideologues ruling our lives, and we let it happen. We just sit back and let it all be, and then vote them in again. There's a fun definition out there for this: ineptocracy. I don't know where you're supposed to put the emphasis or the accent. Ineptocracy. Definition: ineptocracy, a system of government where the least capable to lead are elected by the least capable of producing. All right, so think about that. We've already said these elites who are incapable morons get elected or appointed to these high positions, and largely because it's of the votes from relatively uneducated people in inner cities like Providence, or other elites who have no university MBAs, who have no real life experience other than book smarts, or who otherwise think they're better than us. The least capable of producing are the ones who are electing the least capable of governing. And the definition goes on to say, and where the members of society least likely to sustain themselves or succeed are rewarded with goods and services paid for by the confiscated wealth of a diminishing number of producers. So an ineptocracy is the opposite of a free market capitalistic democracy, right? The exact opposite. Instead of achievement being rewarded, achievement is discouraged and dependency is encouraged. Instead of dealing in the real world realities of market demands and medical demands and whatever else, we pretend that these ineptocrats actually know what they're talking about. Here's just one example. I mean, how many times did we hear about how masks and lockdowns will help? And now we all know, we've seen the evidence. The ineptocrats will never admit it. The media will never admit it. The media will only promote the dictates of the ineptocrats, but they were wrong about all that. So here's just one more chart to exemplify that. We go back to, let's see, where does this go back to? January, I can't see. What does that even say down there? January 2020, I guess when this whole thing began. I remember when this whole thing began. What's that song? Oh, yeah, Jesus Christ Superstar. So here we go. Joe Biden, things are going to get worse much worse before it gets better. Nope, didn't happen. Deaths are going to go up. A CDC director, 2,000 per day at this point. Nope, just continue to go down. Remember in our state, we've talked about it with Andy Boston, Dr. Andrew Boston, many times. And we've mentioned, even before he was on, we mentioned the absolute ineptitude of the ineptocrats and the ineptocracy, who predicted that Rhode Island would need 2,500 on the low end, maybe as high as 4,500 hospital beds. They first predicted that last spring. We set up all these extra centers, medical centers at the convention center over here at Sockanosset Crossroads. Last spring, we never got higher than 300 or 400. This winter at the peak, we never got higher than 400 or 500 hospital beds needed. But yet the ineptocrats predicted, and public policy was formed on the basis of the ineptitude of the ineptocrats, who predicted that hospital bed requirements would be 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 times higher than they actually were. And this happens on issue after issue after issue. Climate Day, we had Earth Day last week. Do you remember? I won't even go through them today. I mean, it would take me 45 minutes to go through all the predictions, all the dire things that were supposed to happen. We don't have an increase in hurricanes or fires or droughts any more than we did, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's just that they're more publicized in the media with the 24/7 media. But all the dire predictions about the ice caps going away in 10 years and the flooding that would occur, and Miami would be washed away, in New York, and whatever else, people being incinerated. The little global warming we've had at the end of last century, because we really haven't had much in the last 20 years, has actually been good for our planet, as it has been in millennia past. A little increase of a degree centigrade makes it easier for crops to grow in greater parts of the world to feed our Earth's growing population. The little increase in global temperatures we've had, again, they've leveled off over the last 20 years, but the little ones we had at the end of last century were actually good for this planet and are good for this planet. And there's no evidence at all that we're facing any kind of crisis or emergency or existential threat, as you heard John Kerry talk about recently, the new energy czar for Joe Biden. The ineptitude of the ineptocrats in this ineptocracy is stunning, and yet it rules the day. It rules the day. And we just sit back and let it all be. I'm tired of it. You're probably tired of it because you're watching, but nobody wants to get up and do anything about it. We talk about it. We fret about it. We write our tweets and write our posts and we listen to shows. But when it comes to actually doing, none of us do anything. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of groups you can volunteer to help. There's a lot you can do, but we just sit back and let it all be. Idle talk is useless, folks. If you want to affect change, you have to affect change. And you have to take leadership. All right, tomorrow we're going to close. Tomorrow we're going to have an update from the Rise Up Rhode Island group, who is fighting these more of these mandated tests for high school athletes if they want to participate in spring sports when there's no medical reason. Again, the ineptitude of the ineptocracy is demanding that people who are not going to be affected by this virus put themselves at risk by taking controversial tests in order to play sports. Outdoors where things can't spread. We know this. But these parents aren't just sitting back and letting it all be. No, you'll hear from them tomorrow on our show. Thursday, we have two guests. The largest independent group representing small businesses in the state, the NFIB, Chris Carlozzi, the Rhode Island director, will be on. And then at the bottom of the hour, Dr. Andrew Boston. And again, did you know there have been 12 directly attributable deaths to COVID vaccines of people in Rhode Island? And I don't know how many dozens more other adverse effects. Well, Dr. Boston's going to go through that. Media doesn't talk about it. They don't want you to know that. There is no reason for healthy young people to be vaccinated or tested. But yet that's going to be the rule, and it might kill people. Certainly more than flu shots do. And that's what we'll talk about with Dr. Boston on Thursday. So if we're in the dugout, we'll see you next game.